When you're doing a bubble diagram, it is really helpful to kind of think of all the options of programmatic relationships that are out there. As an example here, have kind of come up with all that I could think of in your typical interiors project. Circulation, of course, is one of the most common ones. But also ingress and egress, where the entry points are in the program. Acoustical, either separation or connection. Visual connection or separation. Even programmatic separation or connection. Sometimes it's important to have things very separated or not. Daylighting, privacy. There's so many different ones out there. In fact, I'm going to take a look very quickly here at some different diagrams. Some are, kind of very simple. In this case, a simple diagram indicating entry and a connection between a dining room and a living room. And there's some keying going on here, which I'm not sure what they're up to. But you can see stylistically, this is a very, hand-drawn look. This one also is very hand-drawn. You can see that obviously it is drafted, or it may even be done on the computer, hard to tell. But you can indicate connections using either arrows, overlaps, line types, all sorts of different graphical symbols. These can be done, of course, on the computer. And the same sort of strategies tend to work. Arrows, double arrows, dotted lines instead of solid lines in those arrows. Again, the visual representation of some of this information can be quite challenging to come up with a graphical language that works for you. And the project that you're working on. And in fact, I like this one because it's just sort of all these different kinds of arrows out there and ways of filling the arrows. And you can imagine each one of these having a different kind of meaning implied by kind of the shape. This one is jagged. This one is smooth. But they both have these kind of side outlets. Whereas this one is a dashed line. Maybe it's not as major a root as, say, this one, and this one definitely has a sort of more meandering spatial feel to it. So anyway, each of these are ways to kind of develop a language. So let's take a look here back at Illustrator and see how we can draw some of these things. First of all, when you go to Illustrator, some of the basic things that you can do when you want to just arrange a bunch of bubbles so that they're kind of aligned with each other. Remember that there are these smart guides. See these purple lines that show up? And what they want to do is they want to arrange your objects, aligning with other objects. In this case, we have a tangent. Let me see if I can show that. A tangent of one circle, but then a center for another circle. So you can definitely get kind of many alignments that are subtle. You can also use, there are alignment tools here. In fact, if you are using, I'm using the Essentials Classic interface, but if you have the sort of regular I guess Essentials, the default one that comes out. Either way, you have this properties bar, and it does have this align option here, and there's a whole bunch of different ones. So for example, you can say, I've got this selection of 3, and I can align it to themselves, and then I can space them vertically equally, okay, just by clicking that button. I could also align them horizontally, okay, so they all line up. Or any number of other options. I mean, obviously, you don't always need to have things aligned, or maybe there's some other arrangement that's going on. So anyway, those are some basic tools. Also, when you want to change these basic objects to give them, I don't know, different colors or different shapes, of course, you can just select an object. And you can, when it has the properties here, you can change the fill either in this menu by just clicking on the button, and it brings up a palette. And everyone likes to choose colors in a different way. Some people prefer using the swatches menu. Let me stretch this out a little bit. I personally, I kind of like this, I don't know, color matrix option. It's entirely up to you. You can also select an object and double click on the fill color here in the menu, in the toolbar, to get basically the same kind of color picker menu. And you can come up with colors that, you know, I don't know, represent your program somehow, or I don't know, there's a whole theory of how you can pick colors that are representative of program elements. Whoops, select that one. There we go. Okay, and we'll get one more. You can also use the recolor scheme if you prefer. There's so many different ways to recolor things. So oh, that's a little too red for me. Let's soften that guy a little bit. All right, there we go. A little more muted. Again, you don't want to, if there's an important space, you might want to choose a more bold color. Generally, it's probably better to have a muted color scheme for your bubble diagram. Now, so we've got these objects here that need to be, we need to demonstrate different elements of them. In my key that I've started off to the right here, you can see I obviously don't have any colors yet assigned to these. They're all the same line. But first of all, we were talking about smart guides. If I wanted to add another row to my key, I'm just going to hold down the Alt or Option key and drag down my copy here. And what you'll see how the smart guides give you a number of things. First of all, I'm holding down Shift to force it to be vertical, but I can also, the smart guide will give me an equal spacing. So if I wanted to add a new area, I could just call it, you know, public, and it spaces it absolutely evenly. So those smart guides can help you with this key as well. In fact, there are so many different things you can do to text and other objects while we're talking about the key. One thing that is kind of nice, for example, if you are using text, oops, I'll make a copy of this text. If you're using the text on top of your bubbles, first of all, obviously it needs to show up on top of the bubble. So I copy the text. I want to make sure that I arrange this and send it to the back. There's my text. But sometimes those text boxes, the color is too close. One thing that you can do, you can take your text, and of course you can change the fill color to be something that maybe shows up a little more strongly on that background. But you can also, interesting enough, change the stroke on text to be darker or lighter, okay? And you can even change the point weight of that. Sometimes that's really handy if you are trying to get the text to show up. Certain things do not show up well. In this case, underlining doesn't accept that stroke pattern. I'm not quite sure why. If you want to remove or add underlining, here in the Properties menu, under Character, there are some more options. Depending on each font, there are different kinds of options. Obviously, the size is something we're familiar with, but you can change the scale of the text just by changing these numbers. But you can also underline it or not underline it. You can add a strike through or not. You can add superscripts, subscripts. There's all sorts of different text options. In fact, if you're really into text, if you go down here under the Type menu, there's all sorts of different options for changing text. So anyway, that's one way that you can modify your text as you're creating the key. All right, so let's talk now about how to draw some of these lines that define our diagram. And this actually gives me an opportunity to talk a little bit about some of the different drawing tools. First of all, basically there are four different ones that you tend to use a lot. The pencil, which is over here, the paintbrush, the pen tool and the curvature tool. So these two tools, the pencil and the paintbrush, are basically click and drag tools. So you click on the pencil, you click and drag to draw, okay? And it will draw some line here. Let's give that a little more stroke so we can see it. The paintbrush tool works basically the same way. Usually with the paintbrush tool, when you click and drag, it applies a brush style automatically to it, so that you know, whatever typically it's this mop brush handle, any path that you create, and that's what these guys are doing. They're creating some kind of path. You can add a brush style to it. It's really pretty straightforward. Here, I'll go to my Essentials Classic view here, so I have my handy brushes menu. You can also go to the window pull-down menu and choose brushes. And you can add all sorts of new brushes. I drew that line with the, let's see, scroll pen. I drew that line with the pencil tool, but I can still apply any kind of stroke that I want. And again, going to the stroke library, there's so many interesting ones out there, and of course you can also download them if you prefer. Okay, so anyway, these are click and drag tools. They have their purpose, but then the pen tool, the way that works is you click to draw the anchor points, and by default it will draw straight lines, so line segments. If you click and drag with the pencil tool, the pen tool, it will add what are called Bezier anchor points. And what those are, I'll just use my direct selection tool, select this guy, and if I grab one of those anchor points that has a Bezier adjuster on it, let's go back in here, you can kind of change, whoa, come back, you can change the angle of the arc by clicking and dragging these Bezier anchor points, or handles, I guess they're called. So it allows a little bit more control, but basically the rest of the pen tool path that it creates are these straight paths. If you decide you want to add a Bezier point, this little circle here, if you click and I'll just zoom in on that, if you click and drag that circle, it will soften the end point there, and now you end up with a couple of Bezier points that you can modify. Okay, so that's how the pen tool works, and you might say, well, what's the big deal about that? Well, if you find that you just want to draw a path that has all Bezier points, you can use the curvature tool, which is basically the pen tool, except by default every point is a Bezier. Every anchor point has Bezier handles on it. So, and again, it just depends what you're trying to draw. The big advantage of drawing a path in this way, or with the pen tool, even if you have a mix of segments and curves, is that they're already collected together. You can quickly apply a stroke to them, which allows really easy modification. So anyway, I think I'm going to just draw a straight line for my circulation, and maybe this is my goal space. I can hold down the Shift key, by the way, to draw a straight line, and maybe I'll just use a fairly simple stroke. But I think I'll use a stroke color that is kind of red and maybe a little bigger here so that we get a little more drama. What you'll see, by the way, the path is off to the side of the stroke. Every type of stroke has a kind of different way that it's configured. In fact, you can double click on the brush to see some of the options here. There are so many options, and each one varies, of course, with the type of stroke. So, for example, if I wanted a little more opaque, I can get a darker line. You can change the bristle thickness. Each one of these, by tweaking it, can get a real interesting look. So anyway, that's fine with me, and maybe I'll shorten this up a little bit. What's really nice is that when you use brushes and strokes like this, they are infinitely kind of modifiable for our purposes. Okay, so what's nice here also is that this is just using kind of ready-made components. We don't have to do anything custom. So what if we want to show a connection between two spaces? Maybe this is the dining room, and this is the, whoops, let's bring that to the front. Maybe this is the living room here. Those would be natural spaces to have a connection. Again, you can draw a line. I'll just copy one of these lines here. Okay. The simplest thing is you could literally just draw, or here, I'll just draw a segment here. Using the line segment tool. That's probably the easiest thing. The line segment tool, by the way, only draws straight lines. Each of the tools under the line segment tool, the arc tool, spiral tool, they only draw that one thing. So obviously that's handy if you know you want a straight line. But, you know, that's not a very exciting connection line between these spaces. Let's see if we can gussy it up a little bit. First of all, we can make it a lot thicker. Okay. You could keep going here, maybe that wide. There are all sorts of modifications that you can do to this line. All you need to do is go to the stroke menu. If you go here, there's the stroke menu in this Essentials Classic view, or you can just click here in the Appearance section of the Properties menu. Those underlined objects also bring up the stroke menu. Either one, you know, they look the same. And what you can do, there's so many different options for how to handle this. First of all, let's make this a little smaller, and I could just add an arrowhead to both ends. Okay, and you might say, well, that arrowhead doesn't really look very good. It's a little bit large there. You can just change the size, and you can actually change the size of individual arrowheads at the end or the beginning, or you can just change them both. Interesting enough, you can also change the alignment of the arrow, and so you might experiment with that. This one kind of, what I like about using the alignment where it kind of spreads into the space, I feel like that kind of says, oh, these two spaces are connected, as opposed to having it just align right to the edge of the circle. Again, there's kind of a graphic language and implication that can be done. You can also, so that's one method, okay? And if I were to use that method, I might come over here, and if I wanted, well, let's see, that to be the programmatic connection, I could just copy this line and you know, use this icon here as my programmatic connection. And again, I'm going to use my smart guides here to help me out. Okay, that's probably a little long. So you see how you can kind of build up your key, and again, I can just copy this guy. Sometimes these objects that you use in the diagram are going to be a little bit larger than are going to work nicely in your key. So of course you'll want to change that down to a size that is not going to overwhelm your key. You know, you see it's still easily legible. I could come in here and make this a dashed line by just clicking the dashed line button. Okay, and there are dashed lines can be done in any number of ways, but the way the default values that are prescribed here are written in as basically the length of a dash and the length of a gap, and you can have up to 3 different variations. But so let's see, this isn't very dashy, so we could make this say 20 points, point being a measure of size, and come in here and make this 20 and 5. Okay. And you see how it kind of evens out the dash. By the way, the there are options for how exactly the dash is described, because every line segment, it won't divide up evenly. So if you want it more even, click this button here, which aligns dashes to corners and path ends. So it basically kind of squeezes the dashing in, as opposed to this one, which kind of preserves the dash length. And you can have irregular distances here, by the way, if you wanted. If you wanted like a dash dot, for example, you could make this smaller. And again, it's just kind of a matter of how you handle things. One interesting thing that you can do here, by the way, let me just copy this guy again, is that you can change the dashing. What I'll do here, I'm going to use this line as, I don't know, maybe a visual or an acoustical connection. I could make this a much larger line, you know, maybe even 100 points. Okay. Come on. There we go. And let's make it gray. I don't really like the way it looks, being that heavy. But you can easily change the dashing. Like maybe I'll just make these all 5 points apart. Okay, and now I'm kind of indicating a connection between these spaces. And again, you might want to fiddle with these to make them look kind of graphically representative of what you want. You know, that's a really nice way to kind of draw spaces together. You could also, if I select this guy, I'll make another copy. And here, let's just rotate it around a little bit and give it a different color so that we're not showing the same thing twice. And maybe this one has a 10-point dashing or something like that. Okay, maybe that's not quite enough. Let's go with 15. Okay. Again, you can see you're trying to graphically represent different things. Maybe this is a visual connection between these two spaces, but it doesn't have to be, you know, a physical connection. Maybe I use brown with a different spacing. In fact, when you have these different line types, another cool thing you can do is you can apply effects to them that can make them kind of even more interesting. For example, one of my favorite effects is the blur effect. Call that one up. And click preview, and I can soften that image ever so slightly. Okay. And, sometimes I like the contrast of a blurred dashed line on top of these crisp lines. Okay. And obviously you don't have to have crisp lines for your circles. Your bubbles, I mean, whoops, for your bubbles, you can use any kind of line that you want. Another trick that you can do, like let's say I'm liking the way my diagram's looking, but I want to have a different stroke or maybe brush on my bubbles. I can select a bubble, and there is a way that you can select other objects that have similar properties. So for example, if I go to the select menu under same, I could choose any number of options here, but shape is, I think I only have circles as bubbles. I don't think I have any circles other places in the drawing. And you see how it's selected all of my bubbles, but nothing else. Okay, and then that's so handy. Let's say I want to come in and choose, oh, I don't know, choose a watercolor brush. But maybe that's a little too big, so we choose a smaller watercolor brush or something like that. That's actually pretty heavy there. In order to, you know, just to give it a slightly different graphical look. All right. So there's another technique for selecting different kinds of objects. What we can do, there is what's called the width tool. Call that up here. It looks, I don't know what that thing looks like to tell you. I guess it looks like a line with different thicknesses to it. What you can do is if you click on a line, you can change kind of the thickness by clicking and dragging, and it adds these kind of width modifiers, which allow you to kind of stretch the thickness of a line, and you can add them in at any anchor point, or you can kind of add them in between the line. And depending on where you add them and how kind of aggressively you place them, you can get some pretty funky features. Okay, and with each of these, as you modify the line, be cognizant that this line still exists as a series of anchor points which can be modified. So if you're struggling to get it to look just the way you want, each of those anchor points can still be edited individually or selected more than one at a time. Whoops, more than one at a time. If you prefer. Okay, so there are a number of other modification tools under here, by the way. Some of them are pretty funky. For example, the twirl tool, it kind of makes the line all curly. A little hard to see on that one. Here, let's do it to one of these guys here. So, oops, select one of these lines. The twirl tool, it's funky. It makes it kind of go kind of wow, wacky. Anyway, what exactly you would use that for, I have no idea. But the thickness tool is one that I could definitely imagine changing lines. Again, if you're just looking for different effects, or maybe you want to make this dashed or something like that, or some other effect. Anyway, here, let's make it dashed. So, except that didn't really do much of a dashing job now, did it? Once you start changing the thickness of objects, it does make it hard. Certain effects, like arrows and things, become quite unpredictable because they are based on the stroke, and the stroke becomes a very strange number. And what you'll see here is even the kind of standard width profiles, it gets all weird because it's a custom width profile. So a quick way that you can copy this style or any of these styles over to your key, well, obviously you could just copy the line and that would be simplest. But Illustrator has what's called a style, a graphic style kind of library. First of all, I could add the style of this object. I just click New Graphic Style, and it will create a style based on whatever I have selected. So I can now select another object, come and apply the graphic style, and like magic, there it is, all the effects, and that includes the blur, the stroke size, all those other things. And then I can make that a little smaller. And these styles are actually worth exploring. Sometimes there's all sorts of libraries that can be really interesting. Here, let me just stretch this out for you. If you're looking for, I don't know, a particular look to your projects, you can use, let's see, these scribble ones are kind of fun, and they can be tweaked. And of course, there are probably online resources, I'm sure. So, you know, you can really create an interesting graphical look without actually too much effort. There aren't a million of them, but there are some that are quite nice. So anyway, the graphical styles are handy. All right, so the last thing that I want to talk about is what if you want to add some kind of iconography to your diagram. And in fact, we use icons all over the place. In our floor plans, we often have a key for these icons. And in fact, if you're doing it that way, it's a good idea to start them as a separate file. That way, if you make any changes, you can march it out across the entire file. Now, very frequently, we'll look on the internet and try and find images. This is a photograph here. Let me bring it to the front. It's a picture, but you can see it's got some hollowness to it that I don't like, but you can't paint it. Now, I could open it in Photoshop and paint it there. However, there is a tool in Illustrator that allows you to convert this object to basically a drawing. I'm going to make a copy of it so we can see them both. And this is called Image Trace. And in fact, when I'm in the Essentials Classic mode, you can see that Image Trace shows up right here at the top. I like to call up the entire Image Trace menu. And if you just go to the window pull-down menu, you can call up that menu. And the reason I do that, I like it because, first of all, it has some icons up here, which are graphically pretty clear. But then it has a long list of presets that you can use. So, for example, this is basically a black and white logo. So what I can do, if I choose black and white logo, what it's done, it's kind of, it's looked at the image and tried to find all the edges that you would expect to find in a black and white logo. And you can actually adjust how precisely it finds the lines by just dragging the threshold here over. If you want to see the original image, press and hold the eyeball, and you can see what you're tracing. You can see that that's pretty close. You can also increase the number of paths and how many corners there are. What you don't want to do, if you increase some of these too much, you start to get some visual noise. And you can of course drag this number down. And what you'll find is that it's going to basically create a path shaped like this. Now all you need to do is click the expand button, and what it does is it converts the tracing that you made into paths, which you can see here. How can you tell that's a path? Well, because it's now got all these handles on it, Bezier handles and anchor points, and it's an object that you could come and modify individual anchor points if you so desired, if you wanted to make changes to it. But you can also, let me just select the object, you can convert it to a live paint group. I'll just choose Object, Live Paint, Make. And why would I do that? Because now if I come in here with my Live Paint Bucket tool, I could come in and say paint that background some color other than white. So choosing a color, let's choose a little lighter one. What you'll see is that now it finds the boundaries that were in there. Let's see, we've got a little piece there that's not complying. And of course, you have other options. You can change the stroke color too if you wanted to. I don't think it would really make a lot of sense to do that, but you could absolutely do that. Okay, looks to me, I'm just going to ungroup this here. That I have a box left over. I may have to kind of double click in here and grab the box and delete it. Okay, there was an option when I was live painting, live tracing, to ignore white areas. You do typically want to do that. I guess I didn't, so that's why it had that. But anyway, now I have an object that is solid. I can move it over other objects. I can scale it. Okay. And use it. So if I wanted, say, a visual connection between two spaces, I think this was the one that I was talking about, I could move this icon over that spot, and I could even put that in my key. Okay. So what about some of these other objects here? Let me try live tracing this object. So this one, what you're going to want to do, this is going to be a color image. The thing there are actually pretty easy choices when you have a simple color image like this. I could even just choose 3 colors. And again, I can choose how precisely I want the path to be traced. You can see I'm getting a little bit of noise here. So I can drag the noise option down, or maybe add more corners, or maybe just go with a lower fidelity trace. And each image that you have is going to be slightly different. But now I can expand that, and like before, I have an object which is easy to modify, changing the scale, or adding effects on there. Let's preview what that looks like. Give it a little softer view, okay, and maybe I'll add back in, I don't know, little line or something like that. Okay. Oh, except that's too much. Okay. Oh, and once again, I forgot to check the box that tells it to leave the white area. Okay. So you can see that again, having these live tracing can be really handy. Okay. Maybe this space really needs to have daylighting. Now, what if you have just the perfect image that you found off of wherever the internet, but it's somewhat pixelated? There is an option for live tracing a low fidelity photograph. Okay, and what will happen when you do that? Obviously, there's only so much that it has to go on, so it will kind of guess what you want, and you just have to kind of drag these menus around and see if it's getting pretty close. Again, the software, it's kind of an artificial intelligence type of thing. It's just guessing how detailed you want this to be. Let's see, we can add, modify, I don't know, let's see, how does that look? I'm not really getting the edge that I want here. Let's go down with a little less noise. There we go. Getting closer anyway. So anyway, each of these objects has the potential to be converted into a group like this. So anyway, by the way, the method that it finds to either do fills or strokes, depending on the image, you might want to have this snap curves to lines. So sometimes it'll find slightly curved lines in like a technical drawing. You'll want those to be straight. But here's the ignore white button. So that means that this white area, which is in the picture, will be ignored. So anyway, just click expand, and now you have an object that you can paint, okay, and fiddle around with, make it different scales, and use within your project. Okay, and let me just zoom out here, and I think, what did I say? This wanted to be an acoustical connection, right? So I can move that over there, and we'll bring it to the front, okay, and maybe this is a little too big, so we'll make it a little smaller, okay? And there you go. You have a number of ways of creating kind of an iconography to your project. All right. Now, a couple of last things. Let me just delete this guy, and we'll move this over here. If you want to put this on another board, say either in InDesign or in Illustrator? I've mentioned a couple of times that I think Illustrator is nice for individual boards. But Illustrator is not the end-all. InDesign is also pretty nice. Well, first of all, you can select the objects, and it is nice if the artboard fits the objects. So you can just do select the objects in your diagram, and under the artboards menu, under the objects pull-down menu, you can fit it to the selected art. What it does is it crops it down. That way, if you preserve the white background in this drawing, it won't be quite as distracting on your board. You can, when you save this, and I'll just hit save, you can export it in a number of different file formats. First of all, if you're doing the project in Illustrator or InDesign, you don't need to export. You're done. But let's say you're sharing this with a client. I would go to the Export As menu, and I would not choose PNG if you're sharing with a client. And the reason is that with a client, the transparency may cause some problems. They're probably going to preview it either in their Mac preview application or the Windows. Windows likes to make the image show up in Windows Explorer. So I would choose JPEG. JPEG is a good format. Okay. Also, if you have multiple artboards, you can choose the Use Artboards button and pick which artboard you want. Okay. Anyway, and then obviously give it a name, click Export, and what you can do is, first of all, choose the quality of the file. In all likelihood, this is not going to be a very big file. But if you run into image size problems, absolutely change that number. You can also change this number. If someone's just viewing it on a screen, the difference in size is going to be quite a good deal different. What you'll see here is up at the top where it says try export for screens. Sometimes you want to export one version to send to your client and one version to you. If you just click on that menu, it brings up the export menu. We have used this export menu earlier. This is the icon for it here. in the Essentials Classic view, or of course you can go to the Windows pull-down menu and get it there. And you can add a scale. So right now it's adding, it has a JPEG that is 100 DPI or PPI. You can make this a very good deal higher resolution just by adding a scale, or you can even make it a JPEG, or you can make it a PNG. So anyway, when you do this, as before, it has your artboard selected, and just choose Export Artboard. And it will save it onto your computer, and you can go and take a look at it. And what it does is when you have these multiple scales, it will export each one of these and label them appropriately. And here's the image file that you can send to your client. And none of these are particularly large file sizes, but if you're sending a board, you do want to limit that. Anyway, that's how you make a bubble diagram in Adobe Illustrator.